The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Bella Italia, catching the crystal glasses that lined the bar and sending prismatic patterns dancing across the exposed brick walls. Max Romano stood behind the polished mahogany counter, taking inventory of his wine collection, a ritual that always brought him peace at the end of a busy day. He'd built this place from nothing, transforming a rundown pizzeria into one of Boston's most respected Italian restaurants through 15 years of sweat, determination, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. The familiar warmth of success filled his chest as he watched his staff prepare for the dinner rush. Maria, his head waitress of 12 years, expertly arranged fresh flowers on each table while humming an old Italian tune. In the kitchen, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables and sizzle of sautéing garlic created a symphony he'd grown to love. This was his kingdom, his legacy, built on hard work and honest dealings. That's when his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but something made him answer. The voice on the other end sent a chill down his spine, despite the kitchen's warmth. "Max? It's Eddie." 2 words. Just 2 words, and 15 years of carefully constructed stability began to crack. His younger brother's voice was rougher than he remembered, carrying the weight of 8 years behind bars. Max's fingers tightened around the wine bottle he'd been holding. "I didn't expect to hear from you," Max managed, keeping his voice steady. The last time he'd seen Eddie was at the trial, where his brother's reckless choices had nearly dragged Max's reputation down with him. The scheme had been elaborate, using restaurant suppliers as fronts for money laundering. Max had barely escaped the investigation with his name intact. "I'm out," Max got early release for good behavior. Eddie's voice carried a note of desperation that Max recognized from their childhood, the same tone Eddie had used when begging Max to cover for him after breaking their mother's prized vase. "I need help, brother. A job. A chance to start over. I've changed, I swear." Max closed his eyes, memories flooding back. Eddie at 6, following him everywhere like a shadow. Eddie at 12, taking the blame when Max accidentally broke their neighbor's window. Eddie at 25, being led away in handcuffs while their mother wept. Family was everything in their world, it's what their father had drilled into them before the cancer took him. "Let me think about it," Max said, but they both knew he'd say yes. He always did when it came to Eddie. Later that night, as Max shared the news with his wife Carla over dinner in their penthouse apartment overlooking the city, her reaction was immediate and fierce. "Absolutely not," Carla said, her fork clattering against the fine china. "Have you forgotten what happened last time? He nearly destroyed everything you built." Max studied his wife's face, the worry lines around her eyes, the tight set of her jaw. She'd stood by him through the scandal, helped him rebuild trust with their suppliers and customers. She had every right to be concerned. "He's family, Carla. My little brother. And what about our family? What about the baby?" Her hand moved protectively to her stomach, where their first child was growing. It was still too early to show, but the gesture hit Max like a physical blow. "I won't let him put our future at risk." Max pushed away from the table and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, the city lights twinkled like fallen stars. He'd achieved the American dream, the successful business, the beautiful wife, the baby on the way. But success had come at a price. While he'd been building his empire, his brother had been sleeping on a prison cot. "1 month, Max said finally. "We'll give him 1 month, starting in the prep kitchen. At the first sign of trouble, he's gone." Carla's silence spoke volumes. When she finally responded, her voice was tight with controlled emotion. "I hope you know what you're doing. But remember this, if something happens, it's not just your restaurant at stake anymore. It's our child's future too." That night, as Max lay awake listening to Carla's steady breathing beside him, his phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Thanks, big brother. I won't let you down this time. Promise." Max stared at the message until the screen went dark, unable to shake the feeling that he'd just opened a door that could never truly be closed again. Tomorrow, Eddie would start work in his kitchen, and everything would change. The question wasn't if, but how much. In the darkness, Max remembered their father's last words, "Take care of your brother." But as he finally drifted off to sleep, another voice whispered from the shadows of his mind, "At what cost?" The morning Eddie stepped into Bella Italia, Max noticed how prison had changed him. His brother's once easy smile now seemed practiced, calculated. The confident swagger had been replaced by a cautious grace that spoke of years spent watching his back. But it was Eddie's eyes that troubled Max the most. They darted around the restaurant, taking in exits and angles, measuring distances with the precision of someone who had learned the hard way that survival depends on knowing your escape routes. "Nice place you got here, big brother," Eddie said, running his hand along the imported marble countertop. He wore the kitchen whites Max had provided, but they seemed to sit uneasily on his frame, like a costume he hadn't quite grown into. "Real nice." Max watched as his staff cast sideways glances at the newcomer. They'd all heard whispers about the owner's convict brother, and curiosity warred with apprehension in their expressions. Maria, usually warm and welcoming to new employees, kept her distance, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You'll start with basic prep work," Max explained, leading Eddie through the kitchen. "Chopping vegetables, preparing sauces, learning our recipes. Tony will show you the ropes." He nodded toward his head chef, a burly man with tattoo-covered arms who merely grunted in acknowledgement. The first week passed without incident. Eddie showed up on time, kept his head down, and worked diligently. He learned quickly, his knife skills surprisingly precise. But Max couldn't shake the sensation that he was watching a performance, a carefully choreographed dance designed to put him at ease. Late one evening, after the last customers had left, Max overheard Eddie on the phone in the back alley. His brother's voice carried a tension that hadn't been present during working hours. "I need more time." "Yes, I understand the terms, but..." "No, you don't need to do that. I'll figure something out." When Max rounded the corner, Eddie quickly ended the call, slipping the phone into his pocket with practiced smoothness. "Just catching up with an old friend," he said, but the slight tremor in his hands betrayed his unease. At home, Carla's pregnancy-induced insomnia had them both up late, sitting on their balcony as the city hummed below. "Something's not right," she said, wrapping her hands around a mug of chamomile tea. "I saw him today, talking to one of our suppliers. When I walked up, they both got quiet real fast." Max wanted to dismiss her concerns, but doubt had begun to take root in his mind. He'd noticed small discrepancies in the inventory, nothing major, a bottle of premium vodka here, a few steaks there. Things that could be explained by normal wastage, but still. The breaking point came exactly 4 weeks after Eddie started. Max was in his office reviewing the books when he heard the commotion from the dining room. 3 men in expensive suits had entered the restaurant during the quiet afternoon lull. They carried themselves with the casual menace of predators who had long ago learned they had nothing to fear from their prey. "We're here to speak with the owner," the leader announced, his voice carrying the hint of an Eastern European accent. His smile revealed a gold tooth that caught the light like a warning signal. Max emerged from his office to find his lunch crowd frozen in tableau, fear radiating from their faces. Eddie stood near the bar, his complexion ashen, hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I'm Max Romano," Max said, keeping his voice steady despite the rapid beating of his heart. "How can I help you gentlemen?" The man with the gold tooth moved closer, still smiling that predatory smile. "We're here to discuss protection. Insurance, you might say. For your lovely establishment." "I already have insurance," Max replied, though he knew exactly what kind of protection they were offering. "Ah, but not our kind. Your brother understands the importance of proper coverage. Don't you, Eddie?" The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Eddie's early release. The phone calls. The nervous glances. The inventory discrepancies. It had all been building to this moment. "Eddie," Max said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What have you done?" But Eddie wouldn't meet his eyes. His brother, his own flesh and blood, stood frozen, staring at the floor as though trying to sink through it. "Your brother borrowed money to facilitate his early release," Gold Tooth explained, his accent thickening with amusement. "Now the interest has come due. We thought, as a successful businessman, you might want to help families settle their debts. Unless you want certain authorities to receive anonymous tips about your restaurant's business practices." The threat hung in the air like smoke, acrid and choking. Max looked around his restaurant, at the frightened faces of his customers, the protective anger in Tony's eyes, the tears gathering in Maria's, and felt something inside him harden into steel. "Get out," he said quietly. "All of you. Including you, Eddie." "Max, please," Eddie started, taking a step forward. "I can explain. Explain what?" Max's voice cracked like a whip. "How you brought these people into my restaurant. How you put everything I've built at risk. Again." Gold Tooth's smile widened. "You have 24 hours to reconsider. After that, things become complicated." As they left, the bell above the door chiming with obscene cheerfulness, Max caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window. He barely recognized the hard-eyed man staring back at him. That night, as he told Carla what had happened, she didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't need to. Instead, she held him as he wept for the brother he'd lost, not to prison, but to something far more permanent, the death of trust. The weight of betrayal settled over Bella Italia like a heavy fog in the days that followed. Max found himself moving through his restaurant as if in a dream, touching familiar surfaces, the smooth wood of the bar, the cool steel of the kitchen equipment, seeking anchor points in a world that had suddenly lost its stability. Each morning brought new discoveries that twisted the knife deeper. In the prep kitchen storage closet, Max found a burner phone hidden behind cleaning supplies. The call log revealed dozens of conversations with unknown numbers. In the wine cellar, a careful inventory showed more missing bottles than he'd initially noticed, not just random selections, but specific vintages, chosen with the precision of someone who knew their value. But it was the security footage that truly shattered his remaining illusions. Late at night, after Carla had finally fallen into uneasy sleep, Max sat in his office reviewing weeks of recordings. He watched his brother meeting with various individuals in the back alley, some in expensive suits, others looking decidedly more street-level. The conversations were silent on camera, but the body language told its own story, money changing hands, furtive glances, the choreography of deals being made in shadows. "You're torturing yourself," Carla said one evening, finding him once again hunched over his laptop. She stood in the office doorway, one hand resting protectively over her growing belly. The soft glow of the desk lamp caught the worry lines etched around her eyes, deeper now than they had been a month ago. "I need to understand," Max replied, not looking up from the screen. "I need to see where I went wrong." Carla moved behind him, her hands coming to rest on his shoulders. On the screen, Eddie was speaking with Maria, their body language casual, friendly. Max hadn't noticed before how often his brother had chatted with the staff, gathering information, learning routines and vulnerabilities. "You went wrong by believing in family above evidence," Carla said softly. "But that's not a flaw, Max. It's what makes you different from him." The truth of her words settled into the quiet space between them. Max thought about his father, about the values he'd tried to instill in both his sons. Had Eddie sat in his prison cell calculating how to exploit those very values? Had he counted on Max's loyalty, his desperate need to believe in redemption? During the day, Max maintained his composure, a careful mask of control for his staff and customers. But in quiet moments, when the kitchen's rhythm slowed between lunch and dinner service, memories would ambush him, Eddie at 10, proudly showing Max the baseball card he'd saved up to buy him for his birthday. Eddie at 16, standing up to neighborhood bullies who'd been hassling Max's first girlfriend. Eddie at 20, helping to paint the restaurant's walls before opening day, their laughter echoing in the empty space. Had those moments been real? Or had they too been performances, early rehearsals for the ultimate betrayal? The protection money deadline loomed, a sword suspended over everything he'd built. Max found himself studying his customers with new eyes, wondering which might be watching, reporting back. The friendly nods from regular patrons now carried potential threats. Even trusted suppliers became suspects. Who else had Eddie corrupted with his schemes? Tony, his head chef, noticed the change. "We're with you, boss," he said one afternoon, his voice gruff with emotion. "Whatever you need." The whole staff, "We're family too." The word family hit Max like a physical blow. He'd built more than a restaurant, he'd created a community. People who depended on him, who trusted him. Carla and their unborn child. His loyal staff. The regular customers who filled these tables with laughter and celebration. All of them now at risk because he'd allowed blood ties to blind him to obvious dangers. Late that night, as Max locked up alone, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. A video attachment showed men in dark clothes entering a restaurant kitchen after hours. The message below was simple: tomorrow's deadline. Don't make us do this. Max's finger hovered over Eddie's number in his contacts. One call might provide answers, explanations, perhaps even solutions. But as he stared at his brother's name, a new thought surfaced, cutting through the fog of confusion and hurt. Maybe understanding wasn't what he needed. Maybe some betrayals didn't require comprehension to be answered. In the darkened restaurant, surrounded by the quiet evidence of his life's work, Max began to form a plan. Not born from vengeance or hatred, but from something harder and more durable, the determination to protect what truly mattered, even if that meant finally letting go of what he'd always believed family meant. He dialed a different number. "Tony. I need you to gather the staff early tomorrow. All of them. We're not just going to survive this, we're going to end it." As he hung up, Max caught his reflection in the bar mirror. Behind him, the empty restaurant waited, full of shadows and memories. But for the first time since Eddie's return, he saw more than just what he stood to lose. He saw what he was willing to fight to keep. Dawn painted the Boston skyline in shades of amber as Max stood before his assembled staff in Bella Italia's dining room. The morning light filtering through the windows cast long shadows across their faces, each bearing the weight of unspoken concern. In the quietness before opening, Max saw his restaurant through new eyes, not just as a business, but as a sanctuary they had all built together. "What I'm about to share will change everything," Max began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "But first, I need to apologize. I let my brother's presence put everything we've built at risk. Your livelihoods, your safety, your trust in me as a leader." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Maria, who had worked beside him since the beginning, stepped forward. "We found something you need to see," she said, placing a leather-bound ledger on the table. "I noticed Eddie accessing the safe when he thought no one was watching. This was hidden inside." The ledger told a story more damning than Max had imagined. Complex columns of numbers revealed a sophisticated money laundering operation that had begun the day Eddie started. Customer accounts manipulated, supplier invoices inflated, cash flowing through the restaurant's books like poison through veins. "The numbers don't add up to just protection money," Tony explained, his tattooed finger tracing the columns. "This is bigger. Much bigger. Your brother, he's been setting us up as a front for something else entirely." The revelation settled over Max like a physical weight. He thought of Carla's intuition, her immediate distrust of Eddie's return. She had seen what he'd been too blinded by love and guilt to recognize, that sometimes the greatest threats come wrapped in the familiar comfort of family ties. As Max studied the ledger's pages, a memory surfaced, his father's voice, weak with illness but still firm with conviction. family is everything, Max. But remember, son, real family builds you up, doesn't tear you down. The staff meeting transformed into a council of war. Each person shared what they had observed: Eddie's late-night meetings, suspicious phone calls, unauthorized access to business records. The picture that emerged was clear: his brother had orchestrated an elaborate scheme, using Max's trust as both weapon and shield. Later that morning, Carla arrived carrying a manila envelope. Her face was pale, but her eyes blazed with determination. "I hired a private investigator," she admitted. "I couldn't just wait for everything to fall apart again." The envelope contained photographs: Eddie meeting with known crime figures, exchanging documents, entering buildings associated with criminal enterprises. "There's more," she continued, her voice softening. "Eddie's early release wasn't for good behavior. He made a deal with federal authorities. He's been working as an informant, but not just against his old associates. He's been setting up new operations, creating evidence trails. Including here, Max. He's been using your restaurant, your reputation, to build cases." The truth landed like a physical blow. His brother hadn't just betrayed him, he'd weaponized his trust, turned his second chance into an opportunity to create an elaborate trap. The protection money scheme was just the surface. Beneath it lay a web of manipulation designed to entangle Max in a criminal enterprise of Eddie's creation. Standing at his office window, Max watched the first customers of the day approach the restaurant. Regular faces, people who had celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, and milestones within these walls. People who had become, in their own way, part of the family he'd built. His phone buzzed, another message from the protection crew, demanding payment. But now, understanding the fuller picture, Max saw it for what it was: not just a threat, but an opportunity. Eddie had underestimated something crucial about his older brother. He'd forgotten that the same determination that had built Bella Italia from nothing still burned bright. Max gathered his staff once more. "I have a plan," he began, "but it's risky. Each of you has a choice to make. What we're about to do, there's no halfway. We either end this completely, or we don't move forward at all." One by one, they stepped forward. Maria, Tony, the waitstaff, the kitchen crew, each signaling their commitment without hesitation. In their faces, Max saw not just employees, but the true meaning of family, people bound together not by blood, but by choice and loyalty. As they dispersed to their stations, Carla touched his arm. "You're not alone in this," she said softly. "You never were." Her hand pressed his against her growing belly, where their child, their future, stirred beneath. Through the kitchen doors, Max could hear the familiar sounds of preparation beginning. But today, those sounds carried new meaning. They were not just the rhythm of a restaurant coming to life, but the heartbeat of resistance, of people choosing to stand together against betrayal. The sun climbed higher over Boston, and Max Romano began to move the pieces of his counterstrike into place. The time for trust and second chances had passed. Now was the time for justice, served at a temperature far colder than any dish on his menu. The quiet hours before dawn found Max in his restaurant's wine cellar, surrounded by bottles that held stories of vintages and valleys, of sun-drenched vineyards and generations of tradition. Here, in this sanctuary of ordered rows and carefully maintained temperatures, he had always found clarity. Today, that clarity came with the weight of inevitable confrontation. Max ran his fingers along the labels, remembering conversations with his father about legacy. "A good wine," his father had said, "teaches us patience. It shows us that time reveals truth." Now, as Max examined the evidence of Eddie's betrayal scattered across his antique tasting table, ledgers, photographs, surveillance footage, he understood that truth with devastating clarity. The protection money deadline loomed just hours away, but Max felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. It wasn't the false peace of surrender, but rather the steady resolve of someone who had finally understood their own strength. His plan had taken shape not from a desire for revenge, but from a deeper need to protect what truly mattered. Carla found him there, her footsteps soft on the cellar stairs. "The detective called," she said, settling into a chair beside him. "Everything's in place." Her hand found his in the dim light, their fingers intertwining like vines seeking support. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure about what matters," Max replied, thinking of the child growing beneath her heart, of the family they were building, not bound by blood, but by choice and trust. "Eddie chose his path long ago. Today, I'm choosing mine." The morning unfolded with meticulous precision. Max watched through the restaurant's windows as unfamiliar cars began appearing on the street, unmarked vehicles with tinted windows, positioned with casual deliberation. Inside, his staff moved through their regular routines, but there was a different energy today, a contained anticipation. At precisely noon, the men in expensive suits returned, led by their gold-toothed captain. They carried themselves with the easy confidence of predators who had never become prey. Eddie trailed behind them, his prison-honed wariness now tinged with something that looked almost like regret. "Time's up, brother," Eddie said softly as they approached the bar where Max stood. "Did you make the right decision?" Max studied his brother's face, seeing past the familiar features to the stranger beneath. "I did," he replied, reaching beneath the bar. Instead of the expected envelope of cash, he withdrew the leather ledger Maria had discovered. "The question is, did you?" The color drained from Eddie's face as he recognized the book. Behind him, Goldtooth's smile faltered slightly. "What is this?" he demanded, accent thickening with tension. "This," Max said, opening the ledger, "is the truth. About the protection racket, about the money laundering, about the federal informant program." He turned to Eddie. "Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? That I wouldn't understand you were playing both sides, setting up everyone, including me, to take the fall while you walked away clean?" The revelation rippled through the room like a stone dropped in still water. Goldtooth's men shifted uneasily, their predatory confidence wavering as they processed the implications. Eddie's carefully constructed house of cards began to tremble. "Max, listen," Eddie started, desperation creeping into his voice. "I can explain everything. We can work something out. "No," Max interrupted, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of certainty. "We can't. Because this isn't about deals anymore. It's about choices and consequences." As if on cue, the unmarked cars outside began to move. Through the windows, figures in tactical gear emerged, taking up positions. Inside, several of Max's regular customers stood, badges appearing from beneath jackets. The trap, so carefully laid, clicked shut with devastating finality. "You said family was everything," Eddie whispered, betrayal and disbelief warring in his expression. "You said you'd always be there for me." Max felt the last threads of their brotherhood unraveling, not with anger or hatred, but with a profound sadness. "Family is everything," he agreed. "That's why I had to stop you. Because real family doesn't destroy what others build. Real family doesn't turn trust into a weapon." The next few moments exploded into controlled chaos. Federal agents swarmed in from every entrance, their commands sharp and precise. Goldtooth and his men found themselves surrounded, their usual menace deflating like a punctured balloon. Eddie, caught between his handlers and his targets, stood frozen in the crossfire of his own machinations. Through it all, Max remained still, watching as years of deception and manipulation came crashing down. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a deep, quiet certainty that he had finally chosen the right path. Not for revenge, not for justice, but for the future he wanted to build. As the agents led Eddie away, their eyes met one final time. In that moment, Max saw not the brother who had betrayed him, but the little boy who had once followed him everywhere, looking for guidance. "I'm sorry," he said softly, though whether to Eddie or to that memory, even he wasn't sure. The sun had begun its descent when the last officer left, taking statements and evidence with them. Max stood in his empty restaurant, touching the familiar surfaces, the bar, the tables, the walls that had witnessed everything. Each touch felt different now, as if the space itself had been transformed by the day's events. Carla appeared beside him, her presence an anchor in the storm's aftermath. "What now?" she asked, her voice gentle with understanding. Max looked around at his kingdom, not diminished by betrayal but somehow strengthened by survival. "Now," he said, "we rebuild. Not what was, but what could be." 6 months after Eddie's arrest, autumn painted Boston in shades of gold and crimson. Max stood in Bella Italia's newly renovated dining room, watching the morning light dance across fresh paint and polished surfaces. The restaurant had changed, subtle shifts that most customers wouldn't notice, but that spoke volumes to those who knew where to look. The bar had been repositioned to improve sight lines. New security cameras tracked every corner. The safe now required 2 keys and dual authentication. But the real transformations ran deeper than mere physical alterations. They lived in the quiet confidence of his staff, in the strengthened bonds forged through shared adversity, in the way they moved through the space not just as employees, but as guardians of something precious and hard-won. The morning mail brought a letter from the federal prison where Eddie awaited trial. Max recognized his brother's handwriting on the envelope, sharper now, more angular than the flowing script he remembered from their youth. The letter sat unopened on his desk throughout the breakfast rush, through the quiet lull that followed, through the beginnings of lunch preparation. Carla found him there during her daily visit, one hand resting on her now prominent belly, the other holding the latest ultrasound pictures. "You don't have to read it," she said softly, understanding in her eyes. "Some doors are better left closed." Max traced the edge of the envelope, feeling the weight of unspoken words within. "I need to know if I made the right choice," he admitted. "Not for the restaurant, not for justice, but for him. For us." The letter, when he finally opened it, was unexpectedly brief. Eddie's words carried none of their usual manipulation, none of the practiced charm that had once been his shield and weapon. Instead, they held something Max hadn't seen from his brother in decades: truth. "I convinced myself I was protecting you," Eddie wrote. "That by controlling the criminal elements that wanted to exploit your success, I was being the brother I should have been. But that was just another lie, the biggest one being the lie I told myself. You were never the one who needed protection. You were the one I should have learned from." Max felt the familiar ache of loss, not for the brother who had betrayed him, but for the relationship they might have had if different choices had been made. The weight of their shared history, the laughter, the dreams, the promises, settled around him like autumn leaves, beautiful even in their falling. Tony appeared in the doorway, his usual gruff demeanor softened by concern. "The health inspector's here for the quarterly review," he announced. "And Maria wanted you to know the new menu samples are ready for tasting." The mundane details of restaurant life continued, a steady rhythm beneath the deeper currents of change. Max tucked the letter away, understanding that some answers come not from words on paper, but from the quiet certainty of actions taken and paths chosen. Later that evening, as the dinner service hummed with comfortable efficiency, Max watched his transformed family at work. Maria, who had spotted the first signs of Eddie's deception, now trained new staff with a keen eye for character as well as competence. Tony, whose loyalty had never wavered, had developed new security protocols that felt natural rather than restrictive. Even the youngest busboy carried himself with the pride of someone who understood they were part of something greater than themselves. The protection money that Eddie had arranged to be stolen from the restaurant's secret safe had been replaced, not by a single grand gesture, but by countless small acts of dedication. Regular customers, hearing whispers of what had happened, brought new friends to dine. Staff members worked extra hours without complaint during the recovery. Suppliers offered extended terms, their faith in Max's integrity outweighing any temporary financial strain. As the last customers lingered over espresso and tiramisu, Max felt a shift in his understanding of his father's words about family. Blood might determine relations, but it was choice that created true bonds. Every person in his restaurant, from the dishwasher to the sommelier, had chosen to stand with him, to believe in his vision, to help rebuild not just a business, but a community. Carla joined him for their nightly closing ritual, her presence a reminder of the future they were building together. Their child would be born into a world where strength came not from power over others, but from the courage to remain true to oneself. "I've been thinking about names," she said, running her hand along the bar's smooth surface. "What about Anthony, after Tony? Or Maria, if it's a girl?" The suggestion caught Max off guard, bringing unexpected tears to his eyes. Names held power, they carried history, expectation, destiny. The thought of naming their child after those who had helped preserve their future felt right in a way he couldn't quite express. As they prepared to leave, Max paused in the doorway, looking back at the empty restaurant. The space held echoes of everything that had happened: betrayal and loyalty, loss and renewal, endings and beginnings. But more than that, it held the promise of everything yet to come. The night air carried the crisp scent of approaching winter, of change and possibility. Max locked the door with the certainty of someone who had learned the true meaning of protection, not walls built to keep others out, but foundations laid to support those within. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to choose who they wanted to be. But tonight, in this moment, Max Romano stood secure in the knowledge that real strength comes not from never being broken, but from how we choose to rebuild.